They removed his name before the ink had time to dry. Not from a gravestone, not from a ship's ledger, but from a memory that was never meant to survive. In 1898, somewhere along the cold, iron-smelling docks of New York Harbor, a black boy, no older than 13, pulled a man from drowning. The man was well-dressed, educated, important, a man whose hands would later sketch the skeleton of the most famous ship ever built. And the boy? He vanished from the story. This documentary is not about the Titanic. It is about what followed one man onto it. 14 years after that rescue, the boy, now grown, renamed, and quietly erased, boarded the Titanic under a false record. Third class, no family listed, no history acknowledged. And when the ship sank, so did the last living witness to a truth the world was never meant to hear. What you are about to hear was reconstructed from shipping manifests, church burial logs, orphanage intake records, and a private notebook sealed inside a university archive for nearly a century. This is not a story of coincidence. It is a story of containment, because some people are not allowed to survive their own heroism. The man's name, in public records, appears clean, refined, educated in Europe, connected to naval engineering firms that would later merge into the industrial spine of early 20th century America. But in 1898, he was drunk. Witness statements describe him leaning too far over the harbor railing at Pier 54, laughing, gesturing, showing off to men who would later deny they were there. Then the water took him. Cold, black, heavy with coal dust and sewage. Men froze. Someone shouted. Someone else turned away. And then, movement. The boy did not hesitate. He dove in fully clothed, teeth chattering before his body even hit the water. He grabbed the man by the collar, swallowed harbor filth, and kicked until his legs burned. They pulled them both out. The architect lived. The boy collapsed. And in that moment, before applause, before gratitude, someone asked a quiet question that would shape everything that followed. Where did he come from? No one answered. The boy's name does not appear in city census records. Not in 1895. Not in 1900. What does appear is a handwritten note in the margin of a church orphan registry. Male. Negro. Approximate. 12 to 14. Brought by dock worker. No surname given. Knows how to swim unusually well. That last line is underlined. Swimming was not common among black children in that era, not because of ability, but because of exclusion. Pools, schools, and beaches were closed to them. So how did this boy learn? The file gives no answer. But 3 months later, another note appears, this time written by a man whose signature matches that of the architect's early employment contracts. The boy is to be placed. Quiet work. No publicity. From that point on, the child ceases to exist as himself. He is renamed, reassigned, contained, not punished, not rewarded, stored. The boy grows up inside institutions that do not fully acknowledge him. A church basement in New Jersey, a maritime trade school that never lists him as enrolled, a shipyard where he works but is never paid directly. Everywhere he goes, he is watched. Letters survive, written by him but never sent. They are calm, too calm. One reads, "They say I saved a man, but every time I ask his name, they say it is better I do not know." Another, "They tell me ships are honest things, but the men who build them are not." The architect, meanwhile, rises. Design committees, private dinners, sketches of watertight compartments and unsinkable dreams. And always, always, someone makes sure the boy stays close enough to remember, but far enough to never speak. Because the truth he carried was not about heroism. It was about what the architect dropped into the water that night. Something heavier than his own body. Something that was never recovered. By 1908, the boy, now a man in his early 20s, was officially listed as a church auxiliary laborer. That title meant nothing. It was a placeholder used by several East Coast parishes to describe people who were present, useful, and yet never meant to rise. People who cleaned basements, rang bells, copied ledgers, and overheard conversations meant for God alone. The church was old, built with donated stone and quiet money. And beneath its sanctuary was an archive room that never appeared on blueprints. Inside were boxes, unlabeled, dust-choked, locked not with keys, but with expectation. Only certain men were allowed inside. Men who believed silence was a sacrament. The man who had once been a boy was allowed there because he was assumed to be harmless. They underestimated memory. He began copying records late at night. Baptisms, burials, donations, transfers of children between institutions, especially black children, whose names changed as often as their locations. One margin note appears again and again. Subject demonstrates retention. Retention of what? That answer did not come from the church. It came from a notebook he found hidden behind a cracked brick, wrapped in oilcloth, brittle with age, written in the same hand that once signed shipyard contracts. The architect's hand. The notebook was not technical. It was not a design journal. It was a confession that did not believe in forgiveness. The first page read, "There are things that must be carried forward, because to destroy them would require acknowledgement." The entries spoke of experiments, not with steel, but with systems, of how pressure behaves when contained, of how people respond when they are told something cannot fail. And then, one entry dated the night of the rescue. "I dropped it. Not by accident. The boys saw." No description of what was dropped. Only this: if it is ever found, it cannot be explained away. So the witness must be managed. The man who read this closed the notebook and understood something terrifying. His life since childhood had not been protection. It had been preventative maintenance. In 1909, newspapers celebrated the announcement of a new class of ocean liners. Larger, safer, unsinkable. The architect's name appeared often. What did not appear were the meetings held in private offices where churchmen, industrialists, and insurers discussed symbolic absolution. The ship was not just transportation. It was proof. Proof that nothing was lost. Proof that the past could be sealed behind rivets and prestige. The man, still officially invisible, was hired as part of a temporary inspection crew. No contract. No permanent assignment. Just close enough to see. He noted unusual redundancies. Excess compartmentalization. And something else, something the other workers avoided discussing. A sealed storage space below the waterline, not listed in public schematics. When he asked about it, a supervisor replied, "That space is for what cannot be named." The man wrote that sentence down. He wrote everything down. Sleep became unreliable. He dreamed of water that did not move, of metal that breathed. In one recurring dream, he stood on the harbor dock again. Only this time, no one fell in. Instead, something rose. When he reported these dreams to a church elder, as he had been instructed to report anything disturbing, the elder only nodded and wrote, "Subject shows symbolic recurrence." Another phrase that explained nothing and excused everything. But the dreams intensified after he was assigned a name change. Again. This time, the name matched a deceased dockworker from Baltimore. A man who had died without family. The message was clear. If you disappear, you will already have been dead. In April 1912, a third-class ticket was issued. The name on it matched the borrowed identity. The man did not request it. It arrived folded inside a church envelope with no return address. Inside, a single line written in the architect's hand. Some truths require a final vessel. No instructions. No warning. Just passage. The man understood what was being asked of him. Not to speak. Not to expose. But to go where the secret was going. Third class was not chaos. That was the lie told by those who never walked its corridors. It was order, tight, monitored, efficient. A place where names mattered less than numbers and questions were softened by exhaustion. People here were not expected to survive history, only the crossing. The man kept to himself. He listened. He noticed how certain crew members avoided a particular stairwell. How a locked door near the forward hold was never opened, even during routine checks. How one steward crossed himself every time he passed it. At night, the ship hummed, not with motion, but with restraint. Iron holding back pressure. Water held at bay by confidence. The man placed his palm against the wall and felt vibration that did not match the engines. Something was contained. And containment, he had learned, always fails eventually. On the fourth night, the temperature dropped suddenly. Not just outside, inside. Breath fogged in the lower decks. Condensation crept down walls like slow tears. Passengers complained of a smell, rust, and something older, almost organic. The man wrote, "The ship is remembering something it was told to forget." He dreamed again. This time, the water spoke. Not in words, but in pressure, in weight, in inevitability. When he woke, he found a scrap of paper tucked beneath his bunk. No handwriting. Only a symbol. A simple rectangle divided into compartments. the same symbol drawn in the architect's notebook 14 years earlier. The collision was quiet. Too quiet. A shiver. A hesitation. A sound like distant tearing cloth. Passengers laughed at first. Crew did not. The man was already moving when the announcement came. He went not toward the lifeboats, but toward the sealed stairwell. It was unlocked. That alone told him everything. Behind the door was not flooding, but exposure. Water rushing out of something that had been held too long. Inside the compartment were metal crates, bolted shut, stamped with markings used by neither cargo nor crew. One had burst open. Inside, documents sealed in oilskin, blueprints layered over journals, ledgers of names, children, wards, transfers. The system, the thing dropped into the harbor in 1898, had not been an object. It had been evidence. The ship was designed to survive damage, not discovery. As water filled the compartment, the man understood. This was the end of a chain begun the night he dove into the harbor. The architect had built a vessel capable of carrying guilt across the ocean, then burying it beneath the sea forever. The man gathered what he could, but the water was faster. Above him, alarms rang. Below him, history dissolved. He thought of the church basement, the renamed children, the ledgers rewritten until truth became rumor. And he understood why he had been sent. Not to survive, but to witness the burial. When he reached the deck, lifeboats were already lowering. No one looked at him, not because of race alone, but because witnesses are inconvenient. He tried to speak to an officer. The man shook his head without listening. There are moments when institutions reveal their true shape. This was one. The man stepped back. He did not panic. He watched. As the ship tilted, he felt the calm of someone whose purpose had finally been made clear. He returned below decks one last time, not to escape, but to remember. His notebook, water-stained, barely legible, was found decades later in a sealed archive, misfiled among insurance records. The last entry reads, "They will say it was ice. They will say it was pride. They will never say it was fear. I was never meant to arrive. I was meant to go down with it." The ink runs off the page. No signature. No name. Only the weight of a life designed to disappear. After the Titanic sank, the world demanded explanations. And it received them. Ice. Speed. Arrogance. The American inquiry and the British Board of Trade hearings were meticulous in appearance and surgically incomplete in substance. Thousands of pages of testimony were collected. Names were recorded. Timelines reconstructed. But some questions were never asked. No investigator requested the full internal schematics of the lower sealed compartments. When a clerk attempted to append a supplemental diagram, one that did not match the published blueprints, it was removed before printing. The notation beside its removal was brief. Redundant to findings. Redundant was the word institutions used when truth became dangerous. Passenger lists were cross-checked. Survivors interviewed. The dead were counted. But in third class, where records were often handwritten and revised in transit, one name appeared twice, and then not at all. The borrowed name. The man who had once been a boy. Officially, he never boarded. Within weeks of the sinking, 3 parishes along the eastern seaboard quietly merged their archives. Boxes were moved. Ledgers recopied. Old ink transcribed into new hands. A directive circulated among clergy administrators. Materials relating to auxiliary wards prior to 1900 are to be consolidated and sealed. The matter is concluded. No signatures. Only stamps. The church did not deny the boy had existed. It simply stopped remembering him. Baptismal margins were trimmed. Burial entries generalized. The orphan registry where he first appeared was reclassified as damaged by fire, though no fire report exists. This was not destruction. It was soft erasure, the kind that leaves historians doubting their own eyes. The architect lived, not comfortably, but intact. He resigned from public design work within 2 years of the sinking. His later life was quiet, marked by donations to religious institutions and maritime museums that never mentioned his most famous project. In his private correspondence, released posthumously and rarely cited, one line appears repeatedly. Containment is a form of mercy. He never married, never returned to the docks. When he died, his personal papers were donated to a university under a restricted access agreement lasting 100 years. The justification: materials may cause unnecessary speculation. Speculation, in this context, meant accountability. Exactly 100 years after the harbor rescue, a graduate archivist misfiled a box. Inside it was the oilcloth-wrapped notebook. The handwriting matched. So did the fear. The archivist attempted to publish a paper suggesting the Titanic may have been used to dispose of sensitive institutional records tied to early child labor and ward systems. The paper was rejected. Twice. On the third attempt, the archivist was advised to broaden the focus and remove any suggestion of intent. He declined. The notebook disappeared from the archive within 6 months. The catalog entry remains. The item does not. This story is not about conspiracy. It is about design, about how systems learn to protect themselves by deciding who is allowed to be remembered. The boy who saved a man in 1898 did not disappear because he was weak. He disappeared because he was inconveniently brave. He lived just long enough to see the lie completed. And he died where lies are safest, beneath water, beneath steel, beneath official conclusions. Every institution in this story survived. He did not.